Hello and welcome to Expats Everywhere. If you could, tell us your name, where you're from, and a little of your background.
Hi, my name is Chris Callio. I'm currently a teacher in Saudi Arabia. I'm also part of our management team here at King Faisal University, located in Al Hassa. This is my fourth year, and I've signed on to come back for a fifth year. Currently, my main responsibility outside of the classroom is teacher and curricular development, and I'm leading our accreditation process. 28 years old. I have a BA in education, an MA in TESOL, and Saudi Arabia is the third country that I've taught in outside of the United States.
Okay, wow. So what other countries have you worked in?
The first country I worked in was South Korea for 12 months, and then I went to Georgia for 4 months before coming to Saudi Arabia in August of 2011.
Okay, Georgia, what was it like working there?
Georgia was an absolutely incredible experience. I always recommend my expat friends and even my friends and family back home, you have to visit Georgia. It's a country that its best days are ahead of it, but it really has embraced and kept its traditions, its culture. It's just such a fascinating country to be a part of. It's really one of those last countries where you can get a glimpse of what life was like in Europe, half a century or a century ago. So I highly recommend it, and it was a very, very good experience. Frustrating at times, as it is in any country, including our home countries, but wonderful experience.
Wow, that sounds really cool. Have you been back there since working?
I have. I've gone back twice. My first year in Saudi Arabia, the very first vacation for the Eid break, I went to Turkey. I started in Istanbul, and I just made my way basically to the Black Sea area. And from there, I took like a minivan, if you will, to Georgia. And everything started to go wrong there. And it's kind of remarkable how things went so smoothly in Turkey, but so terribly in Georgia. And I guess that's just evidence of the way Turkey has their things together, if you will, and Georgia does not. But I was back there for several days, and I went back to visit my host family, and I saw some of my friends who were still there. And then I was just there again for the Eid break this past October.
Okay, neat. So if you could, tell us what types of jobs are available in Georgia?
Regrettably, not very many. When I worked there, if you don't mind me going back a bit, I started in South Korea. My 12-month contract ended in August. I wanted to work in the United States. It was impossible because most schools have hired by then. So I went to do my TOEFL course, which, as many as you are aware, is something that's almost required to work at an overseas location. Did that in Prague, and plan A didn't work out, plan B didn't work out. I was on Dave's ESL Cafe and suddenly saw Georgia, and that was plan C. I didn't really think I would end up there, but I did end up there. The program which employed me was called Teach and Learn with Georgia. I just call it TLG because Teach and Learn with Georgia sounds very corny. But I don't believe that program exists anymore. I've heard that when the country shifted from a presidential system to a parliamentary system, the new coalition government very much did not like the previous administration's programs, so I heard that they axed the TLG program. Now, when I was back there this fall, I heard from a Georgian teacher that that's not true. It still exists. However, the Peace Corps is still there, and you can find work at universities, but that's essentially it. There aren't really language academies or hagwons like they have in East Asia. So it is regrettably fairly limited.
Okay. Well, can you tell us, what did a typical day look like at your job?
Typical day was, you get up, the roosters would probably wake you up before your alarm clock. You'd have breakfast with your host family, ideally, and that's what it was like for me. And then I would walk to the school, which was about a 20-minute walk in the village, and it was on unpaved roads, so it's very much a farming community. You'd get to school, hopefully you weren't too wet from the rain, because it was usually raining, and you'd start the lessons. Now, it was very, very, very frustrating because the school had just been reconstructed by, I think, a Swiss charity group. So they had this wonderfully beautiful school, but we couldn't go into the school because we were waiting for chairs to arrive. So where did we have to go? We had to go to the nursery school, and that meant that, I would be teaching my 12th grade students who were sharing a classroom with the 11th grade students. You would leave that tiny little area. It certainly wasn't a classroom, but you would leave that area and there would be this big sort of hall, if you will, that had the 7th graders and the 9th graders. And then literally in this closet was where you would teach the 5th graders. So one day, it was so cold, so 3 different classes have a fire going and things just get out of control, and there's dust everywhere, and it was very, very, very frustrating. So hopefully you didn't die from all the dust in your lungs, and you had a lesson of about, 5, 6 classes a day, kind of a typical education day. When I started, it was there were more classes, and it got to a point where I told the principal that it was just a bit too much. Could I go from 8 to 5 or 6? And they agreed. Because on top of that, when you would leave the school, you'd go home and you were contractually obligated to teach your host family members English. So one day I would teach my host father's 2 nieces. 2 other days I would teach the oldest boy, who was about 8. And the other 2 days I would teach the youngest boy. And sometimes his mother would join. And the youngest boy was about 7. So it could be a very long day. And the Georgians are so community-based. So neighbors would always be coming in. There's a lot of pressure to join in the drinking and such. So when a lot of teachers should be lesson planning, they'd be pressured into spending time with the community, and it could be a very long day.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a mix of work and socializing, but maybe not so much prep time. Is that right?
Yes, and also, back home in the States and other Western countries, we very much seem to value our independence and our alone time. Here in Saudi Arabia, I can come home and I can lesson plan or watch movies or whatever. In Georgia, I could do that, but they didn't quite get why I was doing that. They're very much, if you're going to read a book, if you're going to do your homework, you're in the living room with the family. So yeah, in that respect, there were some cultural differences. I only realized in retrospect that I was probably offending my host family. So if you do find yourself in Georgia working in a similar situation, I recommend either making it clear that you need some privacy or spending more time with the family.
Okay, great advice. Well, if you could tell us, how much can you expect to earn doing a job like this?
Very, very, very little. I didn't start saving money until I came to Saudi Arabia. Essentially, all of my Korean money went to paying off my student loans. And then I went to Georgia and I only made $300 a month. And I shouldn't use the word only because Georgian teachers only make about 150 US dollars a month. It's a very, very poor country. And if you want to get a glimpse of what the poverty is like there, before you go, I recommend a documentary. But the documentary is about Georgia's shift from communism to capitalism. And they hire this American electricity company, and you'll see a lot of the Georgians struggle to pay for their electricity. So yeah, it's just a very poor country, and you don't make a whole lot. 50 of my dollars went to the host family, and they were just so excited to see that money because that meant, they could buy new supplies, new groceries, etc. So to answer your question, I made $250 a month. I saved, I don't know, very, very few of that. So it really wasn't until Saudi Arabia before I could start saving. How much can you make now? It's basically in the same ballpark. Everyone knows that Afghanistan is one of the world's very poorest countries. You can go to Afghanistan and work for, I think it's the American University, and make even more than you would make possibly in Saudi Arabia. But I've never heard of a work outlet like that in Georgia.
Okay. What type of lifestyle can you live on $250 a month?
A very drunk one because, like I said, it's just such an alcohol-based country. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but everyone knows that part of the world, Armenia, Georgia, Russia, they very much value their alcohol consumption. So
socially or
yes,
or what? Okay.
Socially. I don't mean like you'd be drinking because you're depressed. I just mean that, like, to give you an example, even in between classes, the teachers would be drinking, and they would offer you a shot, and they'd be kind of surprised as to why you would not drink in between classes. And then you would go to these things called supras, which are basically big dinners with lots of drinking and lots of toasting. And there was one held at the school, and there were some of my students who were under the drinking age there, and they're just drinking with you. And I started off, saying, this is against my values. As an American, as an educator, I'm not drinking with my students, but by that super, I think I just said, to hell with it. So to answer your question, because everything is so inexpensive, you really can have a fun time traveling there. Taxis are inexpensive. Eating at restaurants is pretty inexpensive. And there's just so much to see in that country and the neighboring countries. I shouldn't say the neighboring countries because Azerbaijan is very expensive to get into. Turkey, and I guess I would imagine Russia could be a bit pricey, but Armenia and Georgia are very affordable. So I shouldn't say a drunk lifestyle, I should say an affordable lifestyle.
Okay. How much do you need to start up there? So when you first move, what are some of the startup costs maybe you don't expect that you need to have covered before you go?
That's an interesting question because in my situation, I was with the host family, so you didn't really need anything. They provided you with the food that you eat. They provide you with your home. So let's think hypothetically and say that we're going there and we don't have a host family. We're not in the Peace Corps. We're not in TLG if it still exists. You would definitely, if you are sort of addicted to some things that you can find back home, like peanut butter, for example, I would recommend bringing that because Georgia does not have a lot of the products that we have. But like I said before, it's such an affordable country. You really might be in a better situation to not bring a whole lot of stuff and just buy it there. If you're asking about finances, again, I would bring maybe a $1,000 US, and that might be a bit out of whack. You might need less than that because it really is a very affordable country.
Okay. Well, if you could tell us, how should someone pack to move there? What's the weather like?
The weather, we have a colleague here who worked in Georgia at the time I was working in Georgia. We didn't know each other then, but we were just discussing this earlier this year. And I went in late February, early March. She went in December, January. She said she had never experienced cold like that before in her life. Now, granted, she's from Texas, so anywhere could be pretty cold for her, I imagine. But that should give you an idea of just how cold it can get in the winter. Lots and lots of snow. When I went in March, everything looked very sunny and warm, and for some reason there's palm trees everywhere, which is kind of odd because it's not an Arab nation or whatever. It's in the Caucasus region, so I guess they have palm trees there. So I remember sending pictures back home to folks in Ohio who were struggling with the cold weather, and look at all this warm stuff I'm experiencing. And then I jinxed myself because from then on it was just cold and rainy. And I remember when we went to Armenia, it was so sunny and warm, and then as soon as we crossed that border, just thunder clouds and stuff. So I remember complaining to the Georgians, like, you told me it would be warm and sunny, and next week it'll be warmer, and it's just been rainy. And they told me that typically it is, but when I showed up, it changed the weather so that it was only cold and rainy. So definitely bring an umbrella, or a kolga as it's called in Georgian, and definitely bring some warmer clothes. I remember most nights sleeping with a winter hat on. Bring long underwear, bring lots of socks, wool socks. What they do is they'll take a plastic bottle, fill it with warm water, and put it at the feet of their bed at night sometimes. I was very fortunate. The family gave me like a heater that I slept next to. So it will get cold there, but eventually it'll get very warm and pleasant and even quite hot in the summer months.
Okay. Did you need to pack boots or anything like that for maybe the rain?
I did. I had boots there that I ended up leaving there, and I can't remember why. I had boots, and they came in handy because it is quite muddy. So I think maybe I wore them on the way to work and then changed into dress shoes or something. I'm not sure. Incidentally, my host father's niece's son, who's just a little baby, whenever I would see him, I didn't know a lot of Georgian, so I would just say hi to him, and he would call me hi. So when I left those boots there, my host family told me that he found the boots, brought them to the host family, and just said hi like this. So definitely bring boots.
Okay. This is a question that a lot of people have in their minds before they move to a new place. How safe is it there, and did you feel safe personally?
Very, very, very safe. I told you about my trip to Turkey and how everything started to go wrong in Georgia. What had happened was the bus left me at the border. I took a cab to the hub town, if you will, so that I could take a van to the nearest city, to the little village where I lived. And I put my luggage in the van, and I went off to find an internet cafe. I got back and I couldn't find the van. And it turned out that I had forgotten to change the time on my watch. So the van left on schedule, took my luggage with me. So I didn't have any other choice other than to buy another ticket. However, that driver said, "I'm not taking you if there's only one passenger. So you're stuck here for the night." So in my limited Georgian, I told him, could he drive me to a cheap hotel because I was running out of money. And I could decipher that he was offering to let me stay at his house for a very limited amount of money. And I said, yeah, sure, let's go. You would never do that in the United States, right? You would never, if you were out of luck, you would never go stay at the cab driver's place or whatever. So I just walk in as a little old mother sitting there watching TV or smoking cigarettes or whatever. And I slept in their living room. I didn't feel like it was a bad idea or was unsafe, anything like that. It's just because by that point in time, I knew how safe Georgia was and is. Incidentally, when I told my host family about him charging me, they were outraged. They said no Georgian should ever do that. Georgia has had a history of civil war and political tension, but the Civil War has certainly ended, and the political heat and anger has cooled down a bit. So it's very, very, very safe. The only thing, the driving is it'll make you feel a bit unsafe because they can drive very fast. But they're remarkable drivers. There would always be a cow on the road, and it looked like we were going to hit that cow, but they stopped just in time and swerved around. But yeah, they don't really have safety down there, I imagine.
Okay. How did you meet people, and what did you do for fun there?
All right, well, the first week we were there, they put us in a hotel in the TLG program. We called it the Ice Palace because it was so cold there, and some of us called it the Shining Hotel because we were just so cold in that hotel. But you do a week's worth of orientation, so you take Georgian classes, you hear about what village life is like, and you meet all your colleagues, and most of them are pretty young. At the time in 2011, the U.S. was still in a pretty rough economic shape, so there were a lot of young people who didn't quite know what to do. This was sort of like a Peace Corps program that was shorter, and I think they paid a little bit more. So we just met all sorts of people, and I became close friends with about 5 or 6 people, and we just kept in contact all throughout the year. Now, there were obviously no other Westerners living in my little village, but TLG gave us phones, so we would all keep in contact that way, and we traveled around the country into other countries together, and we still keep in touch with each other. I just saw 2 of my close TLG friends this past summer in Philadelphia. So I love them and respect them very much, and I'm so happy to have met them.
Cool. What did you guys do for fun? You said that you lived in a small village, so what's there to do there?
All right, in the small village, there's not a whole lot to do for fun. To me, fun is like sitting and reading and watching the sunset.
Okay.
Most people don't find that fun, but that I got to do every day in the spring. That's amazing to me. I got to hike. I got to, I lived right next to this country, if you will, called Abkhazia. And I hesitate to use the word country because most nations don't recognize Abkhazia. It was one of the 2 territories that Russia and Georgia fought a war over in 2008. But we were right there. You could see it. That line about where Sarah Palin said she could see Russia from her house. That was me, literally. So I just thought that was so cool. That cool is probably not the best word to use because it really has torn that country apart. But regardless, you can learn a lot about history and geography and geopolitics, and traveling for me is almost always a really great experience. So that's what you can do for fun. I also like to watch movies, and the internet is so slow there that I could only download a grand total of 2 movies in my 4 months there.
How did you cope?
That's very... I'm not addicted to the internet. I like being away from the internet. I don't have an internet subscription now. I don't have a smartphone. But you have to understand to put it in perspective, my computer died for a moment, and I wasn't thinking about the cost of the computer. I was thinking, how am I going to be in contact with the outside world? Because if you don't have internet, you don't have Skype, you don't have email, you don't have Facebook, you have no way to let your folks know how you're doing. So the internet is very valuable there, but it's just so slow. It's very, very slow. I like to go to the movies, and the nearest town had a cinema that played 3 movies the entire time I was there. I think one of them was like Despicable Me, and certainly it would not have been in English. So, yeah, a lot of the things we do for fun back home, like a lot of people like clubs and stuff. There are clubs in Tbilisi, the nation's capital, but certainly none in the village and none in the nearest big city. There's a couple museums if you like museums. There's other stuff like that to do. But in terms of, I guess, a typical American's conception of fun, it will be, you have to do your best.
Okay. If you could, let's wrap it up, and I want to ask you, what are the pros and cons of living in Georgia?
All right, the pros. Let's start with the cons first, and we'll end on a happy note. The cons are the low finances. It can be quite sad to see all of that poverty so often and not feel like you're doing enough to alleviate it. I explained the teaching situation and how, beyond the structure of the buildings, Western education, I think, is superior to the education of the rest of the world, frankly. I mean, in the West, it's dying out a bit with all this obsession with testing, but there's an emphasis on critical thinking, critical pedagogy, cooperative learning, problem-based learning, thinking outside the box, learning about empathy. That they don't have in Georgia. They're very much a rote memorization. I would look at like the history class, and the history teacher would call on a student. The student would stand up and just start reading from the book, and I don't know how that's learning. But you might have a little bit of a clash there. But my co-teachers were very, I just admired them so much. They were such an asset to me. They spoke perfect English, and I want to emphasize that because a con of the country is if you have a co-teacher, that co-teacher might not speak a single word of English. That should give you an idea of the bureaucracy and the lack of logic in some of the education choices. So that can be frustrating, but you might also be so fortunate to have such great co-teachers, as I was. Other cons are the weather that we discussed there. Can be quite cold and rainy. If you're looking for stuff to do that's fun for you that they don't have, as we just discussed, that can be a con. If it's your first time away from home, it's quite natural to experience homesickness. So that can also be a negative aspect of living there. I'll end with this. One big con for me, and for everybody there, is the diet. Georgian cuisine is quite tasty, particularly if you go to a Georgian restaurant. I really recommend khinkali, which is like beef dumplings, if you will. When I was with my friends in Philadelphia this past summer, we made khachapuri, which is cheese bread, Georgian traditional cheese bread. So it's quite tasty, but if you're in the village with a family, you're going to be eating lots of bread, lots of cheese, lots of water that's probably contaminated and that you're not used to experiencing. So your stomach and everything below it is going to experience a lot of sensations that nobody should have to go through. So that is probably what I dislike most about Georgia. and they all love their food. There's nothing wrong with their food. They can't imagine why anyone would dislike their food. So be diplomatic about that. The doctor that I went to spoke English. He said, if they offer you something to drink, make sure you ask for tea, because tea is boiled and it's safer to drink. My host mother would make me spaghetti noodles, and she would fry an egg and put it on it. And that's not really Georgian, certainly not American or Italian, but I still do that for some reason. So I really liked it. But if an egg is hard boiled and the spaghetti noodles are boiled, that's also safer to eat. So be diplomatic about it. Coming back to your question, the pros, I could go on for an hour about that. I currently live in Saudi Arabia. There are many things that just make my blood boil about Saudi Arabia, but I know that when I leave Saudi Arabia, I will think about the positive things. Your mind tricks you into thinking about positive things. It's been scientifically proven that you look at pictures of your past, even if it was during a bad time, many times folks just, they start to think positively and such. So what's the point of that? The point is, I've discussed with you all that I disliked about Georgia, but they are minuscule compared to what I love about Georgia. I think I've spent sufficient time telling you about all the great things.
Chris, we really appreciate your time, and we wish you the best in the future.
Thank you, and go to Georgia.